Good morning, Bitcoiners. Hello, and welcome back to another edition of your Bitcoin Economic Calendar, the news and analysis you need to start the week off right in Bitcoin. I'm your host, Mauricio Di Bartolomeo, and today is March 22nd. We have a very special episode for you this week, as we have a very special week ahead for Bitcoin. This week, we have over $3 billion worth of Bitcoin options expiring. We're going to take a look at that and what the maximum pain point is for that options expiration date. We're also going to use Bitcoin to assess the market value of fiat currencies and see what insights we can draw from there. And last but not least, we're going to touch on Microsoft, who is diving into Web3 with a recent investment, and that is in the blog version of today's Bitcoin Economic Calendar. So grab your coffees, it's going to be a great one. And starting as we usually do with Bitcoin, we can see here from the last two weekly charts that Bitcoin had a very positive week last week, up 9.13%, as well as another up ahead again this week so far, 3.57% in the 2 days of trading so far this week. As we mentioned on the headlines, we can use Bitcoin to expose the true market value of any other currency at any given point. And it can be used to essentially explore the true market value of any other fiat currency. The exchange rate of any sovereign fiat currency is the ultimate report card on a government's credibility. Of course, many governments do not want to be graded by the market in real time. And many times they artificially set the exchange rate to improve some of their optics, but they cannot rein in a fixed price exchange rate between Bitcoin and the local currency. It's very difficult to do. Therefore, many governments like China set restrictions on the free trade of assets like Bitcoin. This is why you cannot easily find a historical feed of Bitcoin prices in platforms or on platforms like TradingView, which we use here for the graphs, for currencies like the Argentine peso, the Venezuelan bolivar, or the Chinese yuan. Like if you look for a price feed for Bitcoin in any one of those currency pairs, you just cannot find one. And these are just a few examples of many other countries that do the same, or currencies. Many times, in the places where the governments do allow basically exchange open and fluid exchanges for Bitcoin, markets can be efficient or inefficient, and the exchange rate between the local currency and Bitcoin can sometimes be disconnected between the local currency and the dollar based on some of the mechanics and incentives that are in place in the economy at the moment. So just to take a look at how that happens, we're going to compare a few markets where there is a very efficient market, a rather robust and large market, and we're going to look at essentially what the differences are on those, but we're going to compare those to markets that are not as big and perhaps not as robust, and we can start seeing some of the cracks and gaps between these currencies. So first, let's take a quick look at markets that are efficient at pricing the difference between its current exchange rate and the dollar and its current exchange rate in Bitcoin. And for that, we can look at a market like Japan. So for this exercise, we have the price of Bitcoin to US dollars on the chart, and we're going to go to the daily. And we're going to start this chart from the month of February, essentially, to assess the changes in the last month or so. So for the first thing we want to do is we want to set the price of Bitcoin to dollars here, and then we're going to compare this to the price of Bitcoin to yuan. And as we can see, when the Bitcoin to dollar pair has gone up by 10%, the Bitcoin to yuan pair has gone up by 15.74%. So if we look at what's happened between the US dollar and the Japanese yen, we get that it has gone up by 5.57%. So if we add up Bitcoin to US dollar increase of 10.18%, and we add up the difference between the dollar and the yen, we get to an increase of about 15.4 basis points. And we see here that the Bitcoin in Japanese yen terms has gone up 15.69 basis points. So essentially, it is even. It is a flush. There's a difference of a few basis points between Bitcoin dollars and dollars to yen versus Bitcoin to yen. And as you can see, this is how what should be. It's very even. It's very efficient, if you want to call it a different name. This similar thing happens when we do this for the euro. So now let's add Bitcoin to euro. Here's the Bitcoin to euro chart, and then we can add dollar to euro, and then we see the difference. So again, Bitcoin in euro terms has gone up 12.71%. Bitcoin in dollars has gone up 10.17%, and dollar euro pair has gone up 2.36%. So again, if we add 2.36% to 10.17%, we get roughly 12.5-ish%. And we see that the Bitcoin to euro pair has gone up by 12.70%. So again, it's off by a few basis points. This market is very efficient at pricing in these differences. Now, let's look at a market that is perhaps not so big and can show us some interesting differences between what we just saw. And for that, we're going to look at Mexican pesos. And we're going to look at Bitcoin in Mexican peso terms. And we're also going to look at dollars versus pesos. And in here, we see something quite interesting. The dollar, as we can see, this hasn't changed. Bitcoin in dollar terms has increased by 10.14%. And we see here that Bitcoin in Mexican peso terms has only increased by 7.50%. So if we add, and now if we look at the difference between the US dollar and the Mexican peso, we see that that difference is down by 1.3%. So if we add the change in rates between the dollar and the Mexican peso, which is negative 1.3, and we add this to the plus 7.37% increase in the Mexican peso, in Bitcoin and Mexican peso terms, we actually see, to the Bitcoin in US dollar terms, we actually see that that gets to about 8-ish%. And the difference is in Mexican pesos is about 7.37%. So there is a quite much bigger gap when you're looking at Bitcoin in Mexican peso terms than when you're looking at Bitcoin in dollar terms and then comparing that to the dollar peso exchange rate. All this to say that some markets can be much more efficient than others at translating the differences or the fluctuations in their currencies into the market price of Bitcoin. So something to keep in mind, as you can use Bitcoin to essentially check or confirm if the open market agrees broadly with the value of the fiat currency as set or determined by central banks. So in other words, you can use Bitcoin to keep central banks in check as to the value that they sometimes determine for their own fiat currencies. So it's a great way to find inconsistencies. So moving on from here, we have a lot more to cover in today's issue. We're going to move into now an update on the El Salvador Bond. And the news here essentially is that the as many of you know, during the Bitcoin City Conference, which was right after La BitConf in El Salvador a few months back, President Nayib Bukele announced that the country would be issuing its volcano bonds, and the offering was going to be the offering is planned for $1 billion, and the proceeds of the issuance would go to construct Bitcoin City, and which would have Bitcoin mining operations and minimal Bitcoin taxes. Now, there seems to have been a small delay in the issuance of this bond. The bond is scheduled to have a 6.5% interest rate and a 10-year maturity. And some of the key factors that could have caused the delay in the bond are, for one, what is happening in the international geopolitical landscape between Russia and Ukraine. There's been extremely volatile international capital markets with everything that's going on in China, Europe, and energy prices. There's also a lot of volatility around Bitcoin prices recently, and there are some news and reports of El Salvador's legislation, some of it what it needs to pass through these bonds has not fully passed, and there's some reports around that front as well. So we will continue to monitor this bond issuance and keep you posted on any updates that come up around this front. Elsewhere, as we also mentioned last week, there is the stablecoin Terra, the protocol Terra, which has a stablecoin UST, made an announcement that it was going to be adding Bitcoin to its reserves a few weeks back. And last week, more details came out from that. Duke Wan, who is the founder of Terra, has the green light to start purchasing apparently up to $10 billion worth of Bitcoin. And he hinted that Terra could imminently start buying up to $3 billion worth of Bitcoin to maintain the protocol's reserves. The purchase of Bitcoin and adding it to the reserves would serve as a pressure release for the Luna Foundation, which runs the USD stablecoin. And they would implement this to essentially keep the stablecoin's peg to 1-to-1 to the dollar during steep market sell-offs and give more stability to the protocol in terms of the collateral pool that it uses to maintain that peg. That's the tweet around that is what you see in your screen, and that's what you how you can make reference to. Quan does post updates, so you can also follow him on Twitter. Elsewhere, there is a big options expiration week coming up for Bitcoin this week. As you can see here from the chart, there's over 83,000 Bitcoin options that are worth to expire, or that are set to expire on Friday. That is equivalent to over $3.3 billion worth of Bitcoin contracts. Now, if we look at the concentration of these contracts, so where most of these contracts are, we can see that there's a big concentration here between the 40 to 42,000 level, a lot of puts on the 40,000 level, and a lot of calls beyond the 40,000 level, as we can see. And so this could act as the maximum pain point for this Friday's expiration. So again, what the maximum pain point is would be the price at which most of the outstanding options would expire worthless. And so this is, as we can see here, if the price of Bitcoin landed somewhere around the 41,000 mark, that would cause a great amount of all of these options to expire worthless. So keep an eye at that 41,000 range, or $40,000 to $42,000 range, as this, if the price is trending close to that range come Friday, it is likely that that market makers will look to push it into, or pin it into that range, just so that most options can expire worthless. So again, this is just an interesting thing to see the distribution of these, because many times this can inform or guide what prices, where market makers could be looking to drive prices to. So just to wrap it up, bears seem to have a lot to gain from suppressing the price of Bitcoin, as we can see from the plethora of calls that are open above that $40,000 level. But there have been slight macroeconomic improvements in the market and an investor sentiment, which can be coupled with potentially a successful offering from the Volcano bonds, or a successful purchase of Terra's billions worth of reserves in Bitcoin, and this could derail the bear market playbook. So we'll continue to keep you posted on this front. And as always, we wrap up with what is ahead for the week. Don't forget that on the blog version of this newsletter, you can find our sections on the S&P 500, gold, DeFi, and mining. Strongly suggest you go check them out, as we're covering some really exciting things in this week's issue, including Microsoft diving into Web3 with a recent investment in Consensus. So without further ado, let's talk about what we can expect for the week ahead. So after the long-awaited rate hike from last week, which brought us higher by 25 basis points by the Fed, we're going to enter into a week that has plenty of economic data and a lot of Fed speakers on cue. Some of the key data points to keep in mind for the week ahead will be initial jobless claims and continuing jobless claims. We're going to see if some of this cooling down in the economy is making or any impacts on the labor market in the US. We also get to see durable goods orders and capital goods orders from companies, again, just to assess from the industrial side and the sort of manufacturing side, can we start seeing any trends as far as lowering some of those inflationary pressures? But again, the data will be very interesting this week. We also get the consumer sentiments from the University of Michigan, as well as the 5-year inflation expectations out of the U.S., with some more data out of the housing market as well in the U.S. Now, importantly, we get a lot of Fed speakers in the week ahead. One important conversation or a speech will be Fed Governor Christopher Waller, who will speak on digital currencies and their role in the economy and how the government looks to enact President Biden's executive order on digital assets. So lots of focus will be around the industry on that chat, and we'll just get into the details. So to do a quick summary of when all this data, when you can expect all of this data. Wednesday, tomorrow at 8 a.m., we get a speech from Jerome Powell, Fed chair, and he will be speaking on digital challenges. So again, this one will be important tomorrow, 8 a.m. 10 a.m. Eastern tomorrow, we get a Cleveland Fed President Loretta Mester speaking to reporters as well. And at 11:45 a.m. Eastern, we get San Francisco Fed President Mary Daly speaking on the economy. So full queue of Fed speakers for tomorrow. Thursday, we get initial jobless claims as well as continuing jobless claims out of the U.S. This is a check to see if the recent economic developments are impacting the labor market. Then on Thursday, 8:30, we get Minneapolis Fed President Neil Kashari speaking on the economy. At 9:10 a.m., we get Fed Governor Christopher Waller speaking on housing. So this isn't the digital asset one just yet. At 11 a.m. Eastern on Thursday, we get Atlanta Fed President Raphael Bostic doing another speech. On Friday, we get the University of Michigan consumer sentiment and 5-year inflation expectations at 10 a.m. And then we get a Fed speech, several Fed speeches actually, all really big day on Friday for Fed speeches. 10 a.m. Eastern, New York Fed President John Williams speaks. 11 a.m. Eastern, San Francisco Fed President Mary Daly speaks again. 11:30 Eastern, Richmond Fed President Tom Barkin speaks. And at 12 p.m. Eastern, this is the big one for the crypto industry, we get Fed Governor Christopher Waller speaking on digital currency. So don't forget, Friday, 12 p.m. or noon, there will be a pretty interesting speech from the Fed on digital currencies. So with that, we've reached the end of our show today. If you enjoyed what we cover, if you learned something, if you laugh, I welcome you to thumbs up, like our show, subscribe to our channel, and share with your friends. And if you don't yet have a Ledn account, I welcome you to check out ledn.io, so where you can learn, where you can start earning up to 9.25% on your USDC and up to 6.25% on your first half of Bitcoin. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful day and see you next week.